The only parallel I can think of that is those of you who have ever been at the ocean and just listen to the waves coming in. You'll hear that wave rushing in, and then you'll hear the pullback. And then the wave rushes in again, and you hear that. That kind of rhythm, the natural rhythm of the waves breaking on the shore, is similar to the right way. The uneven would be that there's not a even back and forth in this. So he says, when that happens, and you're catching and stopping too, you may stop as you exhale, inhale, and then you continue. This can happen even though there's no sound. The first one, there's sound, but the second one can happen, and nobody would hear that. And he said the effect of this is that the mind then gets stuck. The third type is one I've seen a lot of, and I don't know where it comes from. I think it comes from movies, and maybe from a misunderstanding of martial arts. But this he calls chi breathing, energized breathing. And this is, how do we say it? There might not be broken per se, but it's overpowered. It's overpowered breathing. It's this kind of, and you think that you're building up some steam or momentum in doing this. You see it before in the movies when, I don't know, Bruce Lee does it like this, and then they do some action. But in meditation, this actually, from Jerry's point, it tires you out. It's exhausting. And so you can't maintain long meditation through the power breathing. Okay? So what kind of breathing is the right kind? He calls it Chan or dhyana breathing. It's very quiet, it's very subtle, and most importantly, very natural. It's the breathing you do when you're very, very relaxed. If you have regular even sleep, and I've listened to different people sleep, and all three of these other sounds come in sleep. The wind blowing sound. You've ever slept in a dormitory or there's a wind blowing, there's uneven sighing, there's chi breathing, and then there's something like apnea, where it stops breathing. It starts again. That's a little bit of all three. But if a baby's sleeping, let's say a baby who's not stressed out and hasn't gotten past, kindergarten where the stress starts, that breathing is just a very even, quiet, in and out, in and out, in and out. So I say it's natural. There's no sound. It's very even. It's not coarse or broken. It's very refined. It's continuous. And the text says it's like a fine thread just being woven. Just a fine, even thread being woven. In this breathing process, it's also said you're aware of your breathing, but you're not aware. I mean, you know that you're breathing, but at the same time, it's not taking any conscious effort. So at points, you seem that you're not aware of your breathing. It doesn't require any awareness. It happens by itself. Now, the rhythm of this may start out even, and it may be, I don't know how many per minute, if you wanted to count respirations. But as the concentration deepens, the respirations will slow. And they'll get quieter and quieter and longer. And at some point, it almost seems as if you're not breathing. But you're not lacking in oxygen. You're not uptight. You're not nervous. It's just a very natural relaxing of the respiration rate. And when you do this, it naturally happens, then body and breathing sort of come together. The body is relaxed and natural and in this posture, and the breathing just settles in and becomes self-maintaining. So now the third phase, your consciousness is free to pay attention to some meditation technique. So those are the three kinds not to do, the fourth kind to do, and the fourth kind to do is sort of not to do either because it happens by itself if you just let go and relax. Yes?
Well, then what happens if you realize that you're breathing in one of the three ways you shouldn't be breathing, but you can't force the natural one? There's kind of a chicken and egg thing here, right?
So the trick is, it's sort of like you got the hiccups, right? How do you stop the hiccups? You're in it. So the method, there's a number of ways to do it. The most simple way to do it is and this is a contemplation exercise or a centering exercise. And what you do is you're sitting there in the posture, you do the next phase, which is the eyes regard the nose. In other words, you're looking off at that 45-degree angle. And then the nose regards the mouth. And the mouth regards here. And so what you do when you're doing that, if you just sit there, all of you just sit there for a while, the eyes are slightly open, you're sitting straight, your breathing still isn't where you want it to be. And then as I describe this, let your breathing follow the regarding and sink down into here. So the eyes look off and regard the nose, but the nose regards the mouth. And then the mouth regards down to here. And when the mouth regards, contemplates, goes down, it's a visualization, the eyes, obviously the mouth doesn't see, doesn't regard. It's a focusing of attention. You'll feel your breathing drop down to there. And you think then, I am breathing from here, not from my lungs or my chest. I'm breathing from what we call 2 inches below the navel and 2 inches within. And that's the center that you breathe from. That's the center where your awareness goes, and your concentration is all down there. So the rest of the chest, the shoulders, the diaphragm, the stomach can all relax. So it's almost like water, warm water, sinking through the eyes, the nose, the mouth, down to there. And the whole center of your being now is right here. All of this is very soft and supple and empty. So when you're sitting in this posture, although somebody comes in and it looks like you're upright, and it looks like you're at attention, your body should be just soft and relaxed as the sleeping babies. No tension in the shoulder and the necks, no tension in the chest or the upper back, no tension especially here, the diaphragm. And in the stomach is just soft and relaxed. Although you're upright, every muscle, tendon, ligament is just totally like silk. And so when you do that, when you find the breathing, just go through the exercise, the contemplations, bring it down. Because when it's not right, it's being held here or here by the musculature. Okay? Is it helpful? Okay, come on back. I didn't mean for you all to go back into meditation. So, next week we'll focus a little more on the aspects of the mind. But really, this is vitally important to do the 7 to get set with physically, and then do the breathing thing to get it right, because the next phase will become much more easier if these first 2 steps are taken. And sometimes as you're meditating, you have to self-correct. So you find something's off. Now, you weren't self-correcting tonight. I looked up a couple times just to check. And there were a couple people were meditating like this. Really arched and stiff back. One person was meditating like this. Too much bent forward. Another person was like that. And there was one chicken. No, I'm not going to say who. I know you've all had long days. It's Friday. It's okay. Better to be a sick chicken here than a healthy duck out there. But let's go to the text then. Now, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to go through the rest of this tonight, although it's rather long. I don't want to spend a great deal of time on it. One, because it's an introduction outside the body of the text, written by someone else. It's not the text proper, which is what I want to spend most of the time on. Nonetheless, because my teacher included this in his lecturing of this sutra, I'm including it as well. And I'll say some things at the end about this when we finish it, because I'm sure when we're done with this tonight, if you haven't read it already, you're going to go, "Excuse me, is this true? Did this really happen?" So to anticipate that, we'll read through it, together, and then maybe have a little conversation or discussion about what's going on. Now, who wrote it?
Fahai.
Fahai. Who's Fahai?
The master's disciple.
Okay. So it's written by Fa Hai. Some people misunderstood that this was written, 3 dynasties later. It wasn't. Fa Hai was one of the disciples present at this assembly. Because when you look in the text, I mentioned last week, the second one to get taught after the Bhikshuni is Fa Hai. And you'll see other phrases where it says Fa Hai and the others. Now, you could interpret that to mean a little bit self-promotion. It's like saying, if Dharma Master Shur is writing about 50 people that gather around a teacher, and he says, Hung Shur and the others. It's a little bit, I'm not going to go there, although my teacher did mention this possibility that Fa Hai was a little taken with himself. But regardless, he's the one that we know probably kept most of the records on this, probably did some of the transcribing. It wasn't just one. And he probably, from the tone of this, maybe led the compilation exercise as this was taking place. But certainly we know he wrote this. Now, the thing I would say about this is we have no indication that the Sixth Patriarch himself approved of this or even narrated this. It's not in the text. So this inclusion of this information here is coming from someplace else that we don't know. Okay? So let's read on. Last week we finished. He went into hiding for 16 years, right? So we're on page 2. And this will come up later, why he went into hiding for 16 years after he was confirmed by the 5th Patriarch. On the 8th day of the 1st month in the year of Yi Feng reign, and we bracketed roughly that date, or pretty much that date, the cyclical year of Bingzi, he met Dharma Master Yinzong. Okay, Yinzong will be coming up in the text too. It's a very important passage. They engaged in a serious discussion about the deepest truths. Yinzong is a Dharma master. He's a monk. At this time, the Sixth Patriarch is not. He's still a layperson. Remember, he left. He didn't ordain yet. Yinzong immediately grasped and understood the master's teaching. The master's head was shaved then. He becomes a monastic. So one of the rituals of formally becoming a monastic is, of course, you take up the bowl, you get a bowl, you get your robes, usually get a sitting cloth, and your head is shaved, including beard. Some traditions, in the Theravada tradition, I believe they do the eyebrows as well. In the Mahayana, they don't do the eyebrows. I think I don't know why. Some people can get really... See, the reason you shave your head is to save on barber's fees, because barbers are really expensive, and you're receiving alms, so you don't know. The reason you shave your head is both a symbolic and a formal way of sort of disabusing yourself of ego and the associated with the hair and the style of the hair. I know that's not true of any of you here. You don't even look in the mirror. You just comb your hair is where it is, right? But a lot of people spend time over their hair, and they think that their hair is important. So what you do is you shed your hair. It's a sign of not so much renunciation as liberation from vanity. And if you count how many hours are spent in front of the vanity, interesting, it's called a vanity, isn't it? With the mirror and the drawers and the whole thing. Anyhow, if you say, well, how long's my life? Well, you take the time you eat, you take the time you sleep, time in the bathroom, and so on and so forth, and you figure, not much time left, really. If you go to school, depending if you consider that cultivation or not, you've even reduced it further, and then in front of the vanity, knocks it down to just probably, you got a few significant years to do anything. So, anyhow, they shave the head, and that's part of the formal ceremony of becoming a monk. So that's what it means here. He became a monastic. At a gathering of all 4 assemblies. The 4 assemblies were laymen, laywomen, monks, and nuns. So there was a big gathering on the 15th day of the same month. On the 8th day of the following month, eminent and virtuous bhikshus gathered together to transmit the complete monastic precepts to him. And they were. And it goes through who the various masters were. What's interesting about this list here is you have a mix of transmitters or teaching masters who are transmitting, literally giving full ordination. And you notice 2 are from India. So at this time, there was still some mixing going on between the 2 countries in terms of this interchange of Dharma from India into China. Construction of the precept platform had been initiated by Gunabhadra, a Tripathi master, which is obviously not a Chinese name, right? Do you know what Gunabhadra means?
Bhadra usually means good, and guna is like virtue or quality.
Okay, so a good and virtuous one. In the earlier dynasty, this is the earlier Sung, this platform had been established. And sometimes the platform is simply that. It's a makeshift platform that's done simply for the ceremony, creating a sima or a boundary, a sacred space within which the ordination can take place. And sometimes it's more elaborate, and sometimes it's a permanent hall or building, quite magnificent, that's held on for hundreds and hundreds of years, and has a sort of cumulative tradition about generation after generation being ordained there. I saw when I was in, I still like to call it Burma. Miramar just sounds like it's out of the trilogy of the rings, like Mordor. Sorry, editorial. In Burma, we were taken to a place out in the country, was the ancient precept ordination hall, going way, way back. And I'll tell you that the feeling and the architecture, both inside and outside the place, was very special. And they still did the ordination ceremonies there. So that's a precept platform. This was built, now we're looking at about 200 some years earlier. He erected a stone tablet with the inscription, at that time, in the future, a living bodhisattva will receive the precepts in this very place. Aha. What's that about? Well, it could be a general statement that of all the ordinations that will take place, for sure there's going to be a bodhisattva among them. Or it could be that this is an allusion to the Sixth Patriarch, him coming. That's how I read it. Moreover, in the first year of the Tianjin reign of the Liang dynasty, Tripitaka master, here I go, you can nail me for my pronunciation, but it looks like Jana Baishadja. How's close enough?
Yeah.
Not too bad, okay. Would you do it?
Yana Vaishadya.
Okay, just like I said. He had come by sea from West India, carrying a Bodhi tree seedling which he planted beside the platform. So again, in an earlier period of time, an Indian Dharma master came and brought a seedling from a Bodhi tree that he planted there. He also prophesied that, quote, after 170 years, a living bodhisattva will proclaim the supreme vehicle beneath his tree, crossing over multitudes beyond measure. He will be a true transmitter of the Buddha's mind seal, a Dharma host. Another, obviously, prediction or prophecy regarding the Sixth Patriarch. And now the text says, in keeping with these earlier predictions, the master arrived to have his head shaved and to receive ordination. He then instructed the 4 assemblies on the essence of Dharma transmitted from generation to generation. And we can skip this little gloss in between here. These are just nailing down dates. But we spent a lot of time on this. In the following spring, the master took leave of the assembly, returned to Baolin, and now we put translation, Jewelwood Monastery. Yunzong, together with more than 1,000 black-robed monks and white-robed laity, accompanied him directly to Shaoxi. Now, black-robe was the robe of monastics at the time, like what I'm wearing here, with the precept sash, of course, over the top. Over time now, that's changed. In the Theravada tradition, they wear earthy or more ochre colors, a range of sort of rust brown, a little pushing on the orange, perhaps. Tibetan tradition wears a purple color. And so these have changed over time, but at this time in China, the monks wore black robes and the laity wore white robes. What is it in Vietnam? Gray. What do the laity wear? They wear white. Yes? Gray too?
I think it's gray.
Right. Sometimes in the Theravada tradition, the people who are starting to get ready to leave home will wear white. Anagarika, right. So, at that time, Vinaya Master Tongying of the Jing province and several hundred students followed the master there to live with him. So the master finishes his ordination. He goes to this place called Shaoxi, and there's a creek there, by the way, So Shaoxi is also the name of the creek that flows through this area, and that's why you'll sometimes hear people say, when they're talking about Chan or Zen, this has the flavor of Shaoxi, meaning flavor of Chan, but this is referring to the water here. When the master arrived at Baolin at Shaoxi, he saw the hall and the buildings were bleak and cramped, inadequate to accommodate such a large group. Wishing to enlarge them, he visited a villager. Okay, and the villager's name was Chunya Xian, and he said, "This old monk comes to the patron seeking a sitting cloth's worth of ground. Could that be arranged?" Now, how big is a sitting cloth? No, we don't have any here, do we? Yeah, it's about the size of the cushion, maybe a little bigger. So when often in our tradition, when monks and nuns finish the end of the day ceremony, they do last bow, they pick up their bowing cloth and they fold it in this ritualized way, and it comes out to be about that size, and that's one of the things you carry with you. And when you do special ceremonies, you can spread it out and you can use it as a little sacred space that you can bow on. So when you travel, it's kind of carrying your little temple with you. But it's not very big. So, now, excuse me, but they were bleak and cramped, inadequate to... And so then he goes to this layman and says, "Could I have a plot of land about the size of a bowing cloth?" Now, either he wants more land, or this crowd that followed him are like that big. Okay, so we have to figure out what's going on here. The master then took out a sitting cloth to show it to Yaxian, who thereupon agreed. It's no problem. I can give you a piece of land like that. But when the patriarch unfolded and spread out his sitting cloth, it completely encompassed the four borders of Shaoxi. Okay, now you're trying, how did that happen? That's rhetorical.
Thank you.
The four celestial kings appeared and positioned themselves to protect the four cardinal directions. To this day, the mountain range bordering the mountain monastery is called the Celestial King Range. So not only did this cloth, in some fashion or another, at least to the layman, fill up that whole acreage, but the four celestial kings, divine deities, came to protect. Yaxin said, "Wow." No, he didn't. But he would have if he thought. "I know the master's Dharma power is profound." That's like, wow. "However, our ancestral burial ground lies on this land. If in the future you build a stupa, I hope you'll not disturb this burial parcel. I wish to donate the rest to remain a sacred site forever. This ground has the vital energy of a living dragon and a white elephant. Level only the high ground, not the low." So this is the donor's request after giving all this land to the patriarch. Later, the monastery was built in accord with his wishes. The master roamed these lands, and at places where the landscape was inspiring, he stopped to enjoy it. Accordingly, 13 aranyas were erected, which now comprise the present monastic complex of Huaguo. So from this bleak, cramped, rundown thing came this pretty magnificent place, and you'll see that below there's a reference what aranya means, a remote forest or uninhabited wilderness area ideal for hermits to practice Dharma. Okay, let's continue because I said I wanted to cover this all tonight. I know we're going pretty fast, but to dwell on this is difficult. The Baolin or Jewelwood Bodhimanda itself was chosen long ago, okay, by an Indian Druidical master.
Yana Vaishajya. That's a mouthful.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Vaishajya.
Who during his earlier journey from Nanhai passed through Shaoxi, where he cupped water into his hands for a drink. Tasting its sweetness, he told his disciples, "This water is just like the water in India. its source would be an excellent place for a monastery. So the monastery, if we go back a little before it was even thought of as a monastery, was spotted by this Indian Dharma master who was coming through, who tasted the water downstream from this and said, "This is an auspicious place," labeled it such. And following the water to its source, he beheld the stream winding its way through the mountains with the impressive peaks and was moved to exclaim, "This looks just like Jewelwood Mountain in India." So he told the Shaoxi villagers, "You should build a monastery in this mountain. After 170 years, an unsurpassed Dharma jewel, quotation marks, will reach here. And those who will awaken here will number like the trees in the forest, that they therefore should be called jeweled wood, Baolin." Now, the unsurpassed Dharma jewel is just a metaphor or a reference for the teacher who is awakened, who radiates the teachings and embodies it like a bright jewel. And sometimes they also use Dharma vessel as a metaphor to explain that one has the capacity to hold and transmit the teaching. So Dharma vessel, Dharma jewel are used interchangeably. So at that time, the magistrate of Shao province, I'm much better in the Chinese than the Sanskrit, Ho Jingzhong, reported that the prophetic words that were spoken to the emperor, who responded favorably and conferred upon it the name Baolin, which was established in the 3rd year of the Tianjin reign in the Long dynasty. So that's the background history of how this place came to be. Now, here's the story where everybody just goes, huh? In the front of the hall was a pond in which a dragon regularly sported, bumping and scraping the surrounding woods. So the dragon sporting, bumping and scraping means it was big, and when it flew through, it made this sound scraping against the woods. I imagine that would catch your attention. One day, he appeared larger than ever, throwing up huge waves and covering the area with a dense fog. The disciples were afraid. The patriarch, meaning Hui Neng, however, scolded the dragon, saying, "Ha! You can only make yourself big, but not small. If you were a magical dragon, you could transform the small into the great and the great into the small." And the dragon took up the challenge. Parenthetically, I've just added. The dragon suddenly disappeared, only returned an instant later in a small body, skipping along the surface of the pond. The master held out his bowl and teased him, saying, "You wouldn't dare climb into this old Big Shoe's bowl." Right then the dragon swam up to the master, who scooped him out of the water with his bowl. The dragon could not move. With bowl in hand, the master returned to the hall where he instructed the dragon in the Dharma. The dragon then shed his skin and departed. His skeleton, only 7 inches long and complete with head, tail, and claws and horns, is preserved in the temple. Later, the master filled the pond in with earth and stones. An iron stupa now stands in that very place in front of the hall. Years later, parenthetically, this is added by someone. Years later, the dragon skeleton was lost due to fire caused during a war. Okay, so, done. This is Fa Hai's introduction. Now, I could, if we had a lot of time, just ask you all, which I do in my class, so, what do you think? And we get some very interesting responses. So, I mean, just quickly, if anybody wants to, you don't have to, if I say, what do you think? Any responses?
It's a metaphor.
It's a metaphor. Okay, so the whole thing, the dragon and the water and the thing about the sweet dew and all these are metaphors to symbolize, right, something else. Purity, spiritual abilities, and so on and so forth. Okay, metaphor.
Very descriptive description.
It's very descriptive. It's very graphic. Now, that's what you make of it, or you want to go further?
It's Tang Dynasty's description. I mean, we have iPad nowadays, and they have dragon. So
Okay.
I hope that wasn't the last dragon. I'm a little worried about it.
Okay, so metaphor, Tang Dynasty, I think where you're sort of going maybe is that it's conditioned by a particular consciousness at a time in history in the Tang Dynasty. Okay, yes?
Well, it seems like the text itself is trying to establish historical veracity, because it says like, this official then reported it, so it almost seems like it actually entered official record, and there's that component.
Very interesting point. So what you have here, and why I wanted to skip over, and the people who were on our translation team, no, you cannot skip over. You have to get it's this time of the celestial of the moon of the 8th month, blah, 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 blah. And because that gives it authenticity of actual time. It's like, it doesn't say once upon a time in China, right? A dragon came. No, it says, and so you've got this juxtaposition of this very precise historical time, and then these very, let's say, not so precise events that you can't quite put together. So, and one of the things that struck me about this when I read it, because when I read it to my class, the class goes through and separates out. This I can believe. So this must have happened. This is gobbledygook, or magic, or superstition, or hyperbole, and I can't. So let's move that to the side. And it'd be better if Fa Hai didn't even put that in. And people do that with the Buddha's life story as well. They rewrite the Buddha's biography and leave out what they call the superstitious accretions and the magical and the mysterious and say, here we have an accurate account. So, but what struck me is that there didn't seem to be any dichotomy between the two. It's not, he's just relating matter of fact, like he was born here, this day, this month, and so forth, and then two bhikshus from nobody knows where came, gave him this name, and then in the 6th month and 7th year he did this, and then, of course, he wasn't nourished by his mother, but deities came with sweet dew, and then he left home, but of course, when he left home, there's this dragon, and it doesn't break. It's just going through matter-of-factly the whole thing. So one thing you might say is that the dichotomy between the natural and the supernatural isn't there for some reason. You know, it's like they don't say, and this happened, and now the most wondrous thing, they don't. It's just very matter-of-factly narrated.
It's reported.
It's reported in a very natural way, so you're trying to think, what's going on? Does that dichotomy at all exist in this person who's writing it? That's one question to sort of ask. Because now when we relate these things, we have bells and whistles going off to highlight. And if you're watching a movie and everything's happened, when that moment happens, through special effects, the light changes, right? The sound of the music changes, and you know, and all this sort of thing, and they change the camera angle and the whole thing to let you indicate that something supernatural is happening here. But it doesn't make that shift. Okay.
One way you could interpret it is that he's drawing out the afflictions of his disciples, because they're the ones who are afraid. And the dragon, it covers the whole area like a dense fog, right? So it's totally obscuring the way that his disciples are seeing. So he's kind of like challenging them to come out and deal with it. And they offer themselves into his bowl, right? So like the dragon gets in his own bowl.
And so would you see this more as like metaphor, or yeah? So you lean on that line, and certainly what I'm going to say tonight, I don't think there's any definitive interpretation here that I would want to stand behind and say, yes, this is the way it was. It's metaphor or it's real. I would never presume to say this just couldn't happen. Nor would I presume to say, it definitely happened, take my word for it. I think what it does, at the very least, if we stand between those two and let us sort of challenge our frame of reference and just ask by what basis would we say this was true or not, what authority would we use, authority structure? Would we use science? Or would we use faith? Or would we use, well, it's in the text and that must be true, or Fa Hai was a bhikshu and he wouldn't lie. One of my students said that. No, in fact, we were just reading the Buddha Charita by Ashvaghosha, and it has some incredible stuff in there about the Buddha's life, right?
Yeah,
and we're going through it, and one of the nuns in the class says, "Oh, is this really true? this didn't happen. I just don't believe this. And the nun next to her said, yeah, but it was written by Ashwagosha. And she said, Ashwagosha, oh, he's a bodhisattva. Oh, yeah, then it's true. It really happened.
Was he a bodhisattva?
Yeah, well, according to the two nuns, yes. So suddenly her frame changed from saying, when I look at it through my mind, my ordinary mind, this is hogwash. Couldn't have happened. But now that I know it was written by, she believed a bodhisattva, suddenly all those doubts vanished. So sometimes what I use this for in class is an exercise of saying, whether it's natural, supernatural, you won't even want to make that dichotomy, the basis by which you look at it and say, I think it's this way, or I believe it's that way, or whatnot, is just a kind of a mirror that shows you your structure of making sense right now. And it may shift over time. What makes sense now may not make sense later on. And what made sense later on may not make sense now. So what I'm suggesting here is engage us with a certain flexibility. Some people say that this was written to really call attention to Hui Neng, who, because he was illiterate, might have gone overlooked as being a great teacher. So Faha is trying to bring out and highlight that this is not just an ordinary person. Some people will argue that it's to give more power to the text. As we get into, you'll see the text is very practical, very accessible, very straightforward. And so people might think, well, it's not a sutra, it's not a sacred text because it doesn't have all the clouds and flowers and divine things around it. So it's to sort of give an impetus to accepting that at that level. Some people say it's to show the link between China and India with the Dharma. So the Indian allusions in there and the prophecies and predictions are there to show that he's a continuation of the transmission from Shakyamuni Buddha, and he's the 33rd of the Indian patriarchs, but the 6th of the Chinese. So it's, people will argue that. I'm just giving you various theories. Some people just say it's hagiography. What's hagiography? Anybody know?
It's a biography of a holy person.
Yeah.
Exaggerates it over time.
It's an exaggerated biography of a holy person. In other words, those of you familiar with the Christian Catholic tradition will read the lives of the saints.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and yes. And you'll find, they're replete with miracles and incredible things. I grew up with that. And because my grandmother was Irish, I grew up with more of that than usual. And to her, this was literally true.
Of course.
Of course. And so some people say it's that. And they'll even say it's a genre. Do you know what a genre has? Its tropes and motifs. And so the sweet dew and all these things are. Which is one way you can interpret it. So they're writing a story about a Dharma master, and they're putting it into this genre, and all they're doing is changing the name. Or, and it just occurred to me, you could say that these are exactly the things that happen to holy and sagely people. Just like you have 4 dhyanas or you have 4 stages of arahat, these are very precise categories. And so when you have a holy person, these signs reappear because they're recapitulating a kind of intersubjective experience of awakening with these signs confirmed. So you could go either way on this. You could say, oh, it's just fitting the genre. Or you could say, no, these things actually happen around people who go through these types of experiences.
I would say, it seems to me like it's similar to what you were saying earlier. It's sort of supposed to knock you off balance and make you question your frame of reference. Exactly what we're doing right now, right? Which is, you're supposed to take it in and take a look at where you're coming from and evaluate where you're coming from.
And you can use it in that way. And it's often good to use it in that way because sometimes we presume that the way we're looking at things is actually the way it is, without realizing we're looking through a constructed lens. And we learn these lenses early on. Sometimes children are more apt to take this in seamlessly, without doing the dichotomy. Whereas as we get smarter and we learn different ways of looking at reality, and we learn to culturally sort of conform to the ones that are most acceptable, then we start to split these things up into real, imaginary, supernatural, natural, and whatnot. So some of my students say, I think this really happened. It's very believable. And from their frame of reference, it is. One of my students said, well, it's not evidence-based. And evidence-based stuff, and I said, well, what do you mean by evidence? And what she meant was, quote, scientific. But evidence depends on your framework. So if you're in a shamanistic tradition, this is hard evidence. You know, if you're in a faith-based tradition, this would count as evidence. If you're in a, how shall I say it, tradition authority, if it's not part of your culture and your clan, you would say it doesn't happen. You see, so wherever you're standing, there's evidence to support that, but that doesn't mean all the evidence is in. It's just the evidence that supports the paradigm you're in. So I'm saying let it stretch a little, let it play with it a little. I'll tell you, when I started this investigation of this, like over 45 years ago now, wow. I came through I know you'd find it hard to believe, some of my students will, but I actually had a scientific background. Yeah, I know science then was bloodletting and weevils, but no. It was actually, okay, the 60s, 1960s and 70s when the United States was really getting serious about science because they were afraid the Russians were going to beat them up. And so that was my framework, a very skeptical, scientific, rational kind of education. And when I came into Buddhism and these things, I was a hard sell. I was the doubting Thomas. Do you know doubting Thomas? Everybody? No head shaking, okay. I do this all the time. If I make biblical or Shakespearean references, some of my students go blank. Doubting Thomas was one of the disciples of Jesus who didn't believe anything unless he could see it and touch it with his own eyes and hands. So when the story goes, they said Jesus rose from the dead, he said, not going to believe it unless I can put my finger and touch it. And so that's called doubting Thomas. So that was sort of my position. But I must say, now 45 years later, I don't know how to weigh in on this thing because I've had things happen, and I've seen things happen that, as I quoted you last week from Hamlet, there are more things to heaven and earth than are dreamt up in your philosophy, Horatio, that I could not explain or reconcile with my skeptical, doubting Thomas scientific background. So I am sort of now in between, considering both as equally plausible. You want some examples? Sure. Okay, I'll give you a couple examples. So the dragon in the bowl. Let me illustrate. No, I'm not gonna. Yeah, I had a dragon in my bowl, and I ate them. That was before I was a vegetarian, of course. I was up at the City of 10,000 Buddhas. This was early on. I was still just had finished ordination, and we had a smaller lecture hall then. It was in. Some of you know that it's in a quad. It was a room about 3 times this size. And it was a night like tonight. It was very warm. And so on those nights, we'd leave the doors and the windows open to get some ventilation going. And we would circumambulate reciting before the lecture, and then the master would come out. He would bow on his cushion. He'd go up to the seat, sit formally, and then someone would request the Dharma, and the lecture would begin, usually about the same time, 7:30 to 9. So as we were circumambulating, this bat flew in through the open window and was whipping around the hall. Now, I grew up with 3 sisters, and my 3 sisters were convinced that bats, the problem with bats is they would land in your hair and stick there and then start biting you. So I never saw it happen, but when a bat would come into my house, my sisters would quickly wrap their heads up in scarves and run into the bathroom and lock it and hide, which proved to be a problem because there was only one bathroom. And so sometimes I would lie and say the bat's gone so I could use the bathroom. So people started freaking out here. Now, I don't know why they were freaking out because most of them had their heads shaved. But still, old habits die hard. They were all freaking out. And then on top of that, right through the back door, because there was no steps, this big snake came in. And so we were going, everybody was more or less freaking out, pretending they were in samadhi, walking around. And so the master came, the master sat, and then a couple of the monks decided they were going to be, Don Quixotes and get these vermin out of the hall, and they were going to, and the master says, no, stop. He says, they're here for a reason just like you are. Huh? Just sit down. So he sat down, but everybody's trying to listen and watch out of the corner of their eye, where's that snake, Where's the bat? And sure enough, about 5 or 10 minutes into the master's talk, the snake settled just like where these cords were here, and the bat landed on the master's bowing cushion, spread out like this, and just sitting there. And we're all going, okay, what's this? And then the master stops his lecture, and he's mumbling to himself, and he's doing this. And this is one of the things he did when he was doing certain rituals and devotions. And we're all just sitting there, and after it was done, he finished, and then he used to have a piece of stone to indicate return to the lecture, and he'd take the piece of stone and go, and then we'd start the lecture again. So, and he'd say, well, so thus I've heard. And then I'm sitting, like where you are watching this. The bat literally goes 1, 2, 3, up, takes out and fly. The snake turns around and leaves. And so we're going, and the master says lecturing, and at the end of the lecture he says, so you're probably wondering what that was all about. Yeah. And he said, they just came to take refuge of the Triple Jewel, and I transmitted the refuges for them. And realizing that this life they had been born into the body of a snake and a bat, and they wanted to be able to create the good roots to next life get out of that. And so now let's do the transference and go to bed. And whoa, so can I explain it? No. Can I deny it? No. But I just sort of take it in. Now, you can say, well, you were deluded. You maybe had mushrooms for lunch that somebody gathered there, and, you imagined this whole thing. So I'll tell you another one, and then that'll be it I could tell you a lot, but I'll just tell you another one. This is a little more interesting about what I'm suggesting is a line from the Avatamsaka Sutra. And the Avatamsaka Sutra line is this. Thus, in the same place, at the same time, there are differences in seeing and hearing. In the same place, in the same time, people see and hear differently, even though they're in the same thing. So depending on whatever you want to call it, your awareness and your ability to penetrate layers of reality, things can seem and appear different to you, and not in an imaginary way, but very real. So, to illustrate, some years ago, Hung Sher and I did a bowing pilgrimage outside and a kind of a journey from Los Angeles up to Ukiah. And we bowed along the highway. And as we were passing north of Malibu, California, we got to the coast then. One or two of the CHP officers took it under their good-heartedness to watch over us and to make sure not only that we knew about accidents and safety things and whatnot, but also to just keep, if people would hassle or something, just to protect us. Sometimes they weren't so friendly, but in this particular case, the Malibu CHP was kind and thoughtful. And they're the ones that early on advised us to bow like this. So we were wearing gray robes, and after about 3 months in the sun, the gray robe didn't look much different than the gravel on the side of the road. It's not an outstanding color. So if both of us go down to bow, and sometimes the shoulder is about this wide, especially going through Big Sur, it doesn't even look like a bag of garbage there. It just looks like nothing. And so he was telling us if one goes down, one goes up, at least one of you will be visible. So you keep that motion. And you're like, oh, that's good, And so, and as we were getting out of Malibu, he pulled over and came across, and he had this big package, and he said, he said, my wife has heard about what you're doing. I was telling her about it, and so she baked you a really nice apple pie as an offering. You eat apples, right? I know you didn't eat animals and think, no, we eat apples, yeah. And so I said, and you're the guy that takes care of logistics, right? That was me. I said, yeah. I said, okay, take it. And he says, and make sure all three of you get a piece. And I'm saying, all three of us? And he said, yeah, you two wearing those stupid gray robes, but fortunately, that older Chinese guy behind his red robe is really making you visible, so make sure he gets a piece too. And he said, I don't know, he's not there today, but I've seen him throughout the pilgrimage, so there weren't three people. There was just two of us. So who was the old Chinese man in the red robe that the CHP officer saw? Now you could say, if a devotee from LA came out and saw Guanyin and Amitabha, you go, yeah, right, that's sort of what you expect. But a CHP officer seeing the old Chinese monk in a red robe. So, I just add that to say I'm not so sure anymore that my categories of assessing these things are absolutely correct, and there might be indeed more things to heaven and earth that are dreamed of in my background. Okay, so we'll stop here. Next week we'll get right into chapter 1, and in the first paragraph, the first sentence, it really cuts right to the chase. It's a very powerful statement about the essence of the Dharma. So, any announcements?
This beautiful Buddhist exhibit that perhaps already seen, but it closes this Sunday. It's called Buddhist Days in Teacher, and it has Buddhist statues from the 3rd century, and really, really, really beautiful. And the other thing is, we are with the Great Art Museum, which is in Bangalore, between college and college. It's really worthwhile. It's such a shame that not a lot of people go, and it's very beautiful. And then the other thing is, I'm resuming the class on yoga and qigong, integrating both of them. It's not so much asanas, but more the contemplative aspects of yoga and qigong. So breathing, meditation, that kind of thing. Thank you so much. That's Monday night, 7:30 tonight. Yeah.
Jay Frontier is going to teach meditation in the intro of Buddhism class next Thursday.
Tony is speaking.
Yeah, tell everybody here. You think the flowers are talking. No, quickly stand up or we think we have a magical occurrence here. No, you can say it.
If you repeated that online, can hear it.
So this can hear it. And this is going to come to the, okay. There's a meditation and intro to Buddhism class starting on Thursday nights here. This
No, it's
one,
it's an intro to Buddhist meditation. It's for beginners, people who are new to Buddhism, new to monastery. It's the last class is this Thursday coming up. It's a cycle, so after this, it's on demand. If there are any new people,
so it's a one-time occurrence.
well, 2 weeks ago there was another.
Oh, so if you missed the first one, you could come to the second one.
Yeah, this will be focused on a practice, how to meditate. It's at 7:30 in the dining hall.
Is that loud enough?
No,
Seven-
you can repeat it.
7:30 in the dining hall, introduction to meditation and practice this Thursday. And if you missed the last Thursday, you can still come again.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Next time, everybody's got to come up and use this mic. Otherwise, I'm going to sound like a parrot. Okay? Let's do the transference. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts May their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ing Li San Bao. Did you see my email?
No.
Read my email. I'm going to have to get more. Read my email. We're going to have to get more thorough about this. I forgot